People and people, welcome. This video is my love letter
to coffee.
Now I know that wasn't the perfect shot of espresso. I did that filming in a barn, 10 degrees Celsius. My grinder was not cooperating, but nevertheless, I do love espresso. And yes, this is a total humble brag about my espresso setup that if you were to buy everything new would probably cost you $9,000 to $10,000 Canadian. But isn't that what YouTube is? Just to show off what you've got? In the case of my espresso setup, I got so used to really beautiful espresso when I worked in Toronto full-time that when I moved out to the country, I very quickly started to think about how I could have my own setup. As a filmmaker, as a guy who likes cameras, you can get down a rabbit hole of always wanting to buy new things. There's always stuff to buy. You don't have to buy everything new. So I thought I'd take you through my setup and what I actually paid for it. And first, a piece of advice. It's the advice I give everyone who wants to get into espresso, and that is, don't do it. It's a ton of cleaning, a ton of maintenance, it's expensive, the entry-level equipment is not good. And the last piece of advice that people don't want to hear is that brewed coffee is actually the best way to taste coffee. It's how coffee roasters, people who are really into coffee, it's how they taste it and how they prefer it because it has the best flavor. It's ironic that the cheapest way to brew coffee is the most flavorful. That being said, I can't seem to talk you out of it. I couldn't talk myself out of it. So let's go through my gear, and I'm going to start with what I believe is the most important equipment first. When you're first learning about espresso, you think about this fancy machine, but espresso is nothing without a good grinder. The grinder is absolutely, in any coffee setup, the most important thing. When you put the espresso grinds in the portafilter, the puck that you create is creating a pressure regulator. There is no other way to control the flow of espresso. If your grind is super coarse, the water is going to rush through. If it's super fine, no water is going to rush through. And this brings me to the second most important tool, which is a scale. Hello. That's really the magic of espresso. That's called dialing in your espresso. 19 grams of beans being ground to a perfect size so that when you run it through your espresso machine, that puck of coffee is only letting 30 grams out in 30 seconds. It sounds scientific, and it is. And the only way to keep track of it, to dial it in, to get it in the ballpark of good espresso is using a scale and a good grinder. You don't have to have a fancy Japanese espresso scale. I have this one from Amazon that works great. Just make sure you put something underneath it that steam doesn't get up inside the back of the scale and ruin it. And you want at least 1 decimal place. Tenths or hundredths of grams is really nice. The third thing is the tamper. And I don't know if there's anything special about these. I got this one for like 30 or 40 bucks. The grinder that I have lists for around 1,200 bucks Canadian. The scale I bought is 20 bucks on Amazon. Finally, at the espresso machine. It's the sexy thing you want on your counter so that when your friends come over, they're like,
oh my God, you are so cool. You're so hip. You're so cultured. You're so, such a rad guy, Jesse. Super rad. How do you do it? How do you do it? Tell us. Fill us in.
That's sort of the ideal response when you get an espresso machine. My machine is an Electra 60s single group heat exchanger machine. It's a commercial machine. It's like a total beast. It costs around, I think it's pushing like $6,000 Canadian new if I were to go and buy it today. The machine I got from a tip. It was at a restaurant. They didn't clean it properly. All the little pipes and stuff filled up with scale like your kettle does, but in an espresso machine forces the pump to work harder until it has a heart attack and the pump blows. So I picked up this machine for $600 and spent $40 on a pump. Change of scenery, change a day, change a week. I've been working on this video for almost a month now. Work has been crazy. The last piece of equipment is completely optional, and how I got it was very serendipitous. A good friend of mine works at the company that makes coffee roasters. I've been sort of connected with the coffee scene a little bit through this friend. Had the privilege of going to Guatemala to shoot what they call a trip to origin, where the beans are grown and processed for export. It was very interesting. But now he works at a company that makes coffee roasters. So this is what I got. It's an Ikawa home roaster. It's based on what they call a sample roaster. If you opened a coffee roastery and wanted to roast your own coffee, you would get something just like this to roast little 50-gram batches, to sample, try different roasts before you buy in, before you throw a giant bag of coffee into your roaster, because you can roast coffee an infinite amount of ways. And they needed product shots, and I am a commercial photographer, so as part of my payment, as part of the agreement we made, just because I liked the product, I asked if I could work in keeping the product as a part of my payment. I didn't pay money for it, but I definitely did not get it for free, because your time is the most valuable thing that you have. Most times when there's an opportunity for that, I will say, I will take money, please. But this was something cool, and I have used it. I live in the middle of nowhere, buying fresh, good coffee that I want to run through my grinder, that's not all oily and over roasted, that's roasted artfully. The closest place is around an hour away from my home. So now what I do is I buy bulk green coffee. I roast it in this machine. The only downside to it is that it only does 50 grams at a time. So every roast cycle, that takes about 12 minutes. I kind of get enough espresso for 2 drinks. So I kind of wish it did a pound at a time. The kids run it outside. We just put a timer on and run 6 or 7 batches in a row, back to back. And then we've got our coffee for the week. The roaster is not cheap. It would have cost around $1,700. Keep in mind, these are all Canadian dollars. So that's my $9,000 coffee setup, around-ish, Canadian. And I guess this is the time for the big reveal of just that bottom line of what I paid for everything. I paid a little over $1,000 Canadian, which is like 875 bucks US. I paid very little for this setup, and it makes better coffee than most cafes I go to. As long as I'm careful about using my scale, getting that ratio right, getting dialed in, I make some killer coffees. And it's a nice little process for me in the morning, and a less nice process of cleaning the machine on the weekends. But I love espresso. I love this setup. But the cool thing is about this, and I know I'm friends with and I work with this company. I hate even like getting close to the idea that I'm sponsored or implying that you should buy this. I'm trying to be as completely honest as I can. The thing about this thing is that it has been a workhorse, and just for fun, I started doing the math of the cost that I pay for green coffee, which is way cheaper than roasted coffee, and the amount I've run through this machine. I think it's 70 kilos I've put through this. Imagine that, I put in 50 grams at a time, and I'm already up to 70 kilos. 70,000 grams? Is that even possible? That's a lot of coffee. I've been roasting with this thing ever since I got it. I forget when that was. I had to check the metadata on the raw files for that photo shoot, and I kind of did a rough approximation of me making 3 shots of espresso a day, which I often make more than that. But that's probably a conservative estimate. I don't know. It's a lot of roast. Just the difference in price of buying green coffee and buying roasted coffee has already paid for this whole coffee setup completely. If you can save money, it adds up over time. It's really easy to spend money fast, but if you're patient, you can save a lot of money. You can have really wicked coffee. That being said, don't buy an espresso machine. It's a lot of work. The thing that most people don't want to hear is that you have to look at grinders that are nearing $1,000. But if I can't talk you out of it, if I can't sway you to just brew coffee the old-fashioned way with a scale and a properly temperature-controlled kettle, which makes the best coffee ever, then take your time, be patient, and don't drink coffee after noon.